Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode here on Coastal Trail Medias, where we're jumping into episode 2 of Minimal Financials, where we explore the whole concept of debt repayment and how to get ahead or how to get back to zero when we're currently being held down by a load of debt. So let's jump into the 6 steps to getting debt free and building a debt repayment plan that has you out of debt in 1, 3, or 5 years, depending on your scenario. So step number 1 is face your debt. Now this is probably the one that most people have a hard time with because it sucks, man. It's terrible to actually look at the situation that you've built for yourself and where you are right now, and it can often feel very demoralizing and depressing and intense to look at that bottom line number and realize that's how much money I have to pay back. Especially when you are on a lower income or you're young, it can seem like an unsurmountable problem that you'll just never get out of it. But that's not the case, and the truth of the matter is that as long as you build a plan and that you follow that plan, you'll actually be in control of that debt rather than that debt controlling you.
Truth be told, all you have to do is get together all your financial statements and look at them and see exactly how much money you owe to how many people. So this is an example here. You have kind of some of the general debt categories that most people would run into. You have your mortgage, your student loan, your car loan, your line of credit, your credit cards themselves, your friends and family, so if you've borrowed money from relatives or friends, and then hard money. Once you have all your debt laid out, you're going to want to also put in how much you actually owe for each one of those categories and add them all up. The next thing we're going to want to look at, once we've kind of calculated the sum of the balances, is the interest rate of each one of these debts. Now this is going to change depending on the type of debt and depending on how serious it is. So now that we have all of our debts in one place, we know how much we owe for each one of them, as well as the interest rates associated with each one of those debts. We can move on to deciding whether or not each one of those debts is good or bad.
Alright, so step number 2 now is deciding whether or not the debt that you have is good or bad. Now the truth is that some people argue that all debt is bad. And while in certain situations I would tend to agree with that, there are some more kind of hard rules to deciding whether or not debt is good or bad, because not all debt can be lumped into the same category. The most important part in determining whether or not debt is good or bad is looking at the interest rate. Regardless of the balance or the bottom line of that debt, the interest rate will determine whether or not it makes more sense to pay the debt off as fast as possible, or if it's okay to hold on to it for a little bit longer and invest the money that you would normally put against the debt into an investment that earns you a higher interest rate. And it really comes down to math. Most investments aim to earn between 4 and 7% a year. And so if your debt has an interest rate that is greater than that, then it makes more sense to pay the debt off. Every time you pay that debt off, you're actually indirectly earning yourself a return of the interest rate on that debt. However, if the interest rate is below that 4 or 5% benchmark, that would be kind of a conservative investment return, then it makes more sense to probably invest the money. Because if you're making 7 or 8 or 9% on your money invested in the market or in whatever vehicle you wish, then you're actually going to be generating more money with the money you already have rather than paying down your debt. Now, it is important to mention that for a lot of people, not having debt is a lot more kind of financially stable as well as mentally reassuring to have that debt paid off.
So determining whether or not the debt is good or bad, and as we just talked about, it's going to be looking at what is the interest rate relative to the income that you'll generate if that money were to be invested instead. So in this case, we're going to look at these interest rate numbers and determine whether or not they were above or below our target, which in this case is probably between 4 and 5%. So obviously these first two here are below 4 or 5%, so we're going to classify them as good debt. Now this car loan, on the other hand, even though this interest rate is below 3%, as I mentioned, it's probably a little bit low, and as a general rule, high car loan debt is generally considered to be a bad debt. The rest of these debts, especially the line of credit, the credit card, and the hard money, those are all bad debts, and those are all really easy to see. They're all way above that 4 or 5% cutoff.
All right, so step 3. Once you've kind of put all your debt in one place, you've looked at it, you've determined what's good and what's bad, you're going to want to calculate your interest payments to know how much of the payments that you make every single month actually go against the balance, which turns out is probably not as much as you think, and how much of it is paid directly to the bank as product to them. The way that you do that is quite simple. Most interest rates that you'll see on a credit card bill or whatever is a year-based interest rate. So if your credit card has an interest rate of 29%, you're not actually paying that interest rate of 29% every single month. So if you had a $100 balance, you're not going to get charged $29 in interest every month. You're going to be charged 1/12 of that because there are 12 months in the year. And so it is important to actually calculate that number so that you know how much of your actual payment is going against the balance. And then in the next step, we're going to actually calculate how much money we have to be paying every single month to drastically reduce that balance in order to have it paid off by the end of the time horizon that we've selected.
So for this hard money at 15%, for example, you're not paying 15% every month. You're actually paying about 1.3% every month. This $1,000 hard money loan isn't going to cost you $150 every month. It's actually going to cost you about 1/12 of that. And so that actually comes to only $12.50 a month. There is a calculation that this spreadsheet will do for you, but the quick and easy way of looking at it is we simply take our total balance and we multiply that by our interest rate per year divided by 100, right? So it's actually a percentage, no longer just the 2.8, and then we divide it by 12 per month. And so we come up with, for example, our interest payment on our $150,000 mortgage is about $350. And so we do that for all of them. Your minimum payment is normally determined by the actual bank or the loan. And so those you can probably pop in here as well.
So selecting that time horizon, that's actually step number 4. Determining your time horizon is really going to be based on your personal situation. Now, not all of these potential horizons are possible. If you're on a lower income and you have quite a bit of debt, it's likely impossible to pay it off all in 1 year, maybe not even 2 years, right? So you do have to be realistic. When you look at that time horizon and you look how much debt you have and you look how much income you make, that's when you're going to actually decide kind of what is the proper time horizon for you. Realistically, high consumer debt, whether that's credit cards or hard money loans or kind of money you've borrowed from your friends and family, are things that you want to have paid off well within a year, especially if that balance is kind of low. And so it really does come down to simply deciding when is it that you want to be debt free. Now, a lot of times that's going to be dependent on other things in your life, whether that is potentially buying a home, having children, going back to school, whatever it may be. But those kind of bigger term goals have to be taken into consideration when you're making this decision in order to actually be in a place where that goal makes sense. Every time you make a decision, there has to be a reason behind that decision, because that why, that reason, is what's going to actually motivate you to keep going and in order to actually achieve that goal. But so once you've determined that time horizon, the next step is to actually calculate how much money you need to put against that total debt every single month. And the way you do that is quite simple and is as follows.
So what we're going to do here is we're going to use another quick little calculation that this one is done for the mortgage, that takes the total amount that we owe, it divides it by the number of months that we have. This here represents the 5 years times 12 months, so that's a total of 60 months. So if we owed $150,000 and we wanted to pay it off in 60 months, it would give us a value, and then we have to add our interest payment to get our actual kind of amount that we have to pay in order to pay off that debt in that time frame. We can do that for each one of our groups and each one of our time horizons and sum them together. And so we end up with these numbers. So these here would be the numbers we'd have to pay every single month to pay off all of our debt in those time horizons. However, as I mentioned, those good debts up here we don't need to really consider in this kind of getting out of consumer debt, and so we're really going to look at just this bad debt here. In order to pay off all our bad debt, all of our consumer debt within 5 years, we need to pay $425 a month. within 3 years it would be $629 a month, and within a year it would be $1,600 a month.
Okay, so now we've determined our time horizon. We know how much we have to put against our debt each month, but now what we have to do is actually build a debt repayment plan that we can then follow in order to be able to pay off that total debt by the end of that date. The way to do this is by actually organizing your different debts into kind of high priority debts and low priority debts. And the general rule is there's two different techniques or two different ways you can structure or order these debts. The first one is by putting the highest interest rate debt as your top priority, which financially makes a lot of sense because that's the one that's going to be costing you the most in the short term. So being able to pay that one off as fast as possible is actually going to save you more money. However, there's the second camp that thinks that you should put the smallest debt first as your top priority. And that is because it's human psychology that actually performs better when it's reinforced by continually seeing the progress. So if you were to put a debt where you had $5,000 balance as your top priority, it'll take you a lot longer to pay that off than a debt that is maybe $1,000. So by putting that $1,000 debt first, even though the interest rate isn't necessarily as high, you build up more steam and you build up more confidence that will actually propel you and keep you moving forward. And I think for me, my kind of thought process is it falls somewhere in the middle. So you're going to want to kind of prioritize a fairly low balance but high interest rate debt first, and then kind of work your way through targeting some of the more higher interest rates sooner after that on the list. And then ultimately you're going to want to end with those potentially high balance but low interest rate debts. So let's take a look at an example for that.
All right, so when we're deciding which debts we want to pay off in what order, we need to look at both the total amount that we have to pay as well as the interest rate associated with it. So in this case, we're going to go for that hard money loan at the bottom. For $1,000 at 15%, that's quite a big deal. So we're going to try and take that one out first. The next thing we're going to want to try and take out in this case is going to be that family and friends. Like I said, it's only $300 in this case, and it's really important to just kind of get that out of the way and be even Stevens with the people that you care about. Moving on from there, now we're really going to start tackling that high interest rate credit card at 30%. That's kind of ridiculous. Once we get past the credit card, at that point, it's pretty much a toss-up between what do we want to pay off when. Here we're going with the line of credit first because it does have a higher interest rate, but it's important going into this knowing that those two loans, because the balances are so high, it's going to take a little bit more time to actually get rid of them. We're going to have two sections to this big table down at the bottom of the page. And the lower table is going to show the balance at the beginning of whatever month we're in for each one of our debts. So here, and within the first month, we can see our balances. Now what we want to do using this number as well as our minimum payment values, we want to determine how much we should be putting against each debt every month. So the way to do that is we take our lower priority debts and we put just the minimum against them. So we can see that those numbers there match the minimum payments up here. Now, if we know that the sum of all of our payments has to be equal to 630, we deduct the sum of our minimum payments to our lower priority debts from our total payment, and that will give us the amount to put against our priority debt. Then what happens is in the second month, it'll be adjusted using our payments and the interest gained in that month to show kind of the current balance after the first month. And then we can repeat the process for the next couple of months, and as we go, we'll see that our debt of interest in this case starts to drop. Now at this point, we'll see that at the beginning of the third month, we only have $258.68 to pay on that debt. And so that's what we'll put up in the payment. We'll put our minimums for our next low priority debt, and the difference will be put against our next high priority debt. So in this case, our $258 will go against the balance, which will give us 0 in month 4. We will have the standard balances for the rest of them, and then for the new high priority debt, that significantly decreased because we've put a lot more money against it. Alright, so now that we have our current balances, we see that we'll be able to pay off our next high priority debt this month, and so we'll have to deduct more from the next priority debt down. So we'll see that obviously we'll put 0 against hard money, and we'll put the minimums for our 2 low priority debts. We'll put the remaining balance against our highest priority debt, and then we'll add the difference to our next priority debt. And so now we'll see in month 5 we've paid off both the hard money and the family and friends package, and now we can really focus in on getting rid of that credit card. So we'll see the balance now, and we will do the same thing. We will deduct just the minimums for our low priority debt, 0 from our paid off debt, and the difference from our credit card. So we'll see that gives up 630 total, and we can keep doing this every month until we pay the credit card off. And so in month 9, we'll see that we have only $330 left to pay, so our $440 payment is going to be too much. So obviously we will pay just the leftover, $333. We'll put our minimum against our last priority debt, and then we will add the difference against our next highest priority, and we'll see that our top 3 debts now are paid off. We only have our line of credit and our car loan, and so we know that these are going to take a little bit longer so we can pay off for the rest of the year. So within the first year, what we see is we've gotten rid of our 3 highest priority debts, and we've gotten rid of about 20% of our 4th highest priority, and so we'll just continue this. And so eventually at month 20, we'll pay off the last of the line of credit, and we can start focusing solely on the car loan. And then that will round out our debt payment for year 2.
So whatever your debt payment number is, in order to be able to be debt-free by your time horizon, you need to build that into your budget, and you need to make that a top priority in order to stay on this track moving forward and in order to achieve that goal. So next week's video is going to be all about that, how to build a budget, how to make sure all the numbers work, even on a low income, even on a student income. So I will show you a very generalized budget that has a whole bunch of different categories, and then use it as a template to show you my budget, where I've kind of eliminated a lot of those categories, showing which ones are most important to me, and showing you how I structure my basic budget. So with that, I want to say thank you very much. Thanks for watching. Definitely hit subscribe. Definitely follow me on Instagram at Coastal Trail Medias. And so if you're interested in more of this content, you know, as I've mentioned before, if you are a student or you are on a low income or you're a young professional starting out in your career, you definitely want to be absorbing as much of this knowledge as possible, because these are the formative years that is going to set up the foundation for the rest of your wealth building over your entire life. Thank you very much for watching. Definitely like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you guys next week.